We thank the listeners who have already subscribed to our channel, and we invite new ones to subscribe for free as well. Today, I want you to imagine the Pope, arguably the most powerful man in medieval Europe, just dismissing his royal guards from the room.
Right, sending everyone away.
Exactly. He sits across a heavy wooden table from a desperate Jewish rabbi who has traveled hundreds of miles just to beg for his community's survival.
It is such a dramatic image.
It really is. And instead of debating theology or issuing a harsh decree, the Pope silently slides a carved wooden piece across a checkered board, suddenly revealing a lifelong secret.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds entirely like fiction, right?
Yeah.
A cinematic climax to some historical thriller.
Completely.
But narratives precisely like this one were actually circulating through the alleys and courtyards of medieval Europe, and they reveal something profound about how people actually lived.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive, because when you study the grand sweep of history, you are usually looking at tectonic shifts.
Right, the macro level.
Yes, the macro view. The economic transformations, sweeping religious crusades, major philosophical breakthroughs. But that macro view completely ignores a random Tuesday evening in a medieval home.
I mean, what were people actually doing when the day's work was done?
Exactly. And to answer that, we are looking through a highly specific, totally unexpected lens today. The game of chess.
It is such a brilliant way to look at history.
It is. And I should state right up front, this entire exploration is grounded in the meticulous research of historian and Professor Reuven Feingold from the Hebraica of Jerusalem. His work from June 1994 uses chess to open up this incredible window into the past.
It really takes us through rabbinic courts, bizarre legal loopholes, and even linguistic evolution.
Yeah. But to start, I think there is a common assumption we need to dismantle.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you might assume that since chess is this inherently intellectual pursuit, medieval Jewish scholars were just naturally drawn to it from its inception, like they invented their own variations in isolation.
Well, that is a very common misconception. But Jewish communities did not possess some innate, superior chess knowledge from the very beginning.
They didn't.
No, not at all. Chess actually originated in India, and it slowly spread westward through Persia and the Islamic world.
Right.
So the Jewish communities of Europe learned this game through direct, everyday interaction with their Christian and Muslim neighbors.
Oh, wow. So it was entirely imported.
Exactly. The British historian Israel Abrahams summarized this perfectly. He noted that Jews played the exact same game practiced by their neighbors with the exact same rules and the exact same boards.
That is fascinating. It was a shared cultural touchstone then.
It really was. A rare space of commonality in a world that was otherwise fiercely divided by religious and social boundaries.
But because it became such a shared obsession, a fascinating psychological phenomenon occurred, didn't it?
It did. The game became so incredibly popular within the Jewish community that later scholars felt this profound need to legitimize it.
They needed to justify all the time they were spending on it.
Exactly. So they started trying to retroactively find references to chess in ancient sacred texts.
Which is so funny to me. I mean, they were combing through the Babylonian Talmud, basically trying to prove that chess had been sitting there in the text all along.
Right. And you have to understand, the Talmud is the foundational blueprint for Jewish law and daily life. It was compiled centuries before chess ever reached Europe.
Right, so chess definitely wasn't in there.
No. But if a secular pastime becomes an absolute obsession within your community, there's a natural desire to anchor it within that sacred blueprint.
To justify the countless hours spent playing it, it is sort of like modern nerds trying to find references to video games and ancient prophecies.
That is a great analogy. So scholars started analyzing obscure terms in the Talmud, specifically in Tractate Kitabot, Folio 61b.
And what did they find?
Well, they found two mysterious words that had lost their exact meaning over the centuries. The words were Nardshir and Iskundari.
And they simply decided that one of these mystery words had to be chess.
They did. But the historical guesswork got incredibly imaginative here.
Oh, I read about this. For the word Iskundari, some scholars genuinely theorized it referred to a game played with small dogs.
Yes. I mean, linguistic drift over centuries leaves a vacuum. And people will fill that vacuum with whatever makes sense to them at the time.
Small dogs playing a game. That is incredible.
Right. Iskundari was a total enigma. But then you see a shift. In the 11th century, the lexicographer Nathan ben Yehiel linked the other word, Nardshir, to a medieval board game called Nard.
Okay, so getting closer to a board game?
Exactly. And shortly after, the great French commentator Rashi took it a step further. He connected Nardshir directly to the word Iskwaki.
And Iskwakis was an early European term for chess.
Yes, exactly.
So they are slowly building this linguistic bridge to justify their favorite hobby.
They are. And the final step comes in the 14th century. Rabbi Nissim ben Reuven addresses the whole dog theory surrounding Iskundari in his work, the Sefer Chassidim.
Let me guess, he finally puts an end to the dog theory.
He does. He rejects it entirely. He explicitly describes Iskundari as a wooden game composed of small pieces.
Oh.
He was very clearly looking at his contemporaries playing chess in their sitting rooms and just retrofitting this ancient Talmudic term to describe the game sitting right in front of him.
They successfully rubber-stamped it.
Pretty much.
But even with that ancient justification, not everyone in the leadership was thrilled, were they?
No, not at all. As the game exploded in popularity, the religious authorities started viewing it with intense suspicion.
Why were they so opposed to a board game?
Well, you have to step into the medieval rabbinic mindset to understand why.
Yeah.
In this worldview, time is deeply sacred.
Right.
The study of the Torah is the highest possible calling for a man. So a game that consumes hours of intense mental focus and frequently involves gambling was viewed as a profound distraction.
A distraction from a spiritual and productive life. I know the sage Maimonides had some strong feelings about this. He is arguably one of the most influential Jewish philosophers in history, and he explicitly listed shatranj, which is the Arabic term for chess among forbidden pastimes.
Yeah, specifically if it was played for money.
Right. He stated that professional players were unworthy and lacked public credibility. But what really struck me is the consequence of that.
It was severe.
He warned that professional players would have to answer to community tribunals and that their testimony would be totally invalid in court.
Yes, and this is a crucial point regarding medieval law. In the rabbinic court system, the Bet Din, there is no forensic evidence.
Right. No DNA test or fingerprints.
Exactly. There are no police investigations as we understand them today. Justice relies entirely on the moral credibility of the witnesses.
Okay, so to be a valid witness, you must be a person of standing who contributes meaningfully to society.
Precisely. Maimonides viewed professional gamblers as contributing zero value to the community.
Wow. So by labeling you a professional chess player, Maimonides was not just calling you a slacker. He was legally erasing your civic identity.
He was. You were entirely disenfranchised. If your livelihood depended on moving wooden pieces across a board for money, you lacked the moral foundation required to give honest testimony.
Your word meant absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
Which honestly makes sense within their legal framework. It reminds me of the way a society might view an underground gambling ring today.
That is a very good comparison.
The establishment looks at an obsessive, money-driven gaming subculture and just determines that these individuals operate completely outside the bounds of a productive society.
Exactly. And the fascinating thing is, Maimonides was actually offering a moderate stance.
Wait, invalidating someone in court was the moderate stance?
Yes, because he only condemned it when played for money. The Ashkenazi rabbi Kalon Moshe ben Kalonivos took a much more radical position.
When was this?
This was in his 1322 satirical work, Even Boken. He condemned chess entirely.
Even without money?
Even without a single coin on the table. He argued it should be strictly banned because he saw the sheer expenditure of mental energy as inherently wasteful.
But those bans failed entirely, didn't they?
Completely. The public simply refused to stop playing.
And this brings us to what I find to be the most compelling dynamic in the research, the sheer pragmatism of these communities.
Yes, they were incredibly pragmatic.
Because they found these incredibly clever legal loopholes to keep the game alive, particularly on the most sacred days of the week.
The tension between strict religious law and human nature often produces fascinating compromises.
So despite stern warnings from figures like Maimonides, chess became the undisputed favorite pastime for Shabbat, the Sabbath, and other major holidays.
With the notable exception of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement.
Right, of course. But gambling with money on the Sabbath was strictly forbidden. So how did they justify playing a game so closely associated with betting?
By simply removing the currency. They played for non-pecuniary prizes.
Ah, so instead of silver coins, they bet other things.
Exactly. The winner might receive a piece of fruit, a special portion of the holiday meal, or simply the honor of the win.
That is brilliant. By removing the financial transaction, the game transitioned from a forbidden wager into an acceptable intellectual exercise for a Saturday afternoon.
It did. But the true testament to the power of chess is how it survived times of extreme communal crisis.
Oh, this part is amazing.
Right, because during times of plague, war, or social tribulation, rabbis would often step in and ban all games entirely.
But chess usually survived bans.
It did. It almost always managed to secure a nihil obstat, a formal legal permission to continue.
Why did it get a free pass when everything else was banned?
Well, to understand why, you must look at how medieval communities interpreted disaster. A plague or a devastating fire was often viewed as divine retribution for the community's collective sins.
So the leadership's reflexive response was to purge all frivolous or sinful behavior.
Exactly. They would crack down hard on games of chance, specifically dice and cards. Those were seen as agents of chaos and greed.
But chess was different.
Chess occupied a different psychological space entirely. It was a game of intellect, strategy, and deliberation.
And the specific historical data points on this are just fascinating. Let us look at Forli, a city in northern Italy.
Great example.
Between the years 1416 and 1418, the community there imposed a strict 10-year ban on dice and cards.
But they literally wrote exemptions into the municipal code.
Yes. Players with what they categorized as dubious identities, which I assume meant known gamblers or outsiders, were allowed to play dice or chess.
But there was a catch.
Right. Only if the bets did not exceed exactly 4 silver bollanini.
Right.
And on fast days, bets on cards or chess could not exceed 1 quattrino.
We really need to contextualize those stakes. A bollanino and certainly a quattrino were tiny fractions of silver currency.
So we are talking about absolute micro stakes.
Exactly. The authorities were attempting to legislate morality while acknowledging the reality of human addiction.
They knew they could not completely eradicate the urge to play.
No, especially among transient populations. So they capped the financial damage. 4 bollanini was enough to keep the thrill alive, but not enough to cost a man his livelihood or ruin his family.
That is surprisingly progressive for the 15th century.
It really is.
And Isaac Lampronti's monumental encyclopedia of Jewish law, the Peshat Itzhak, documents something similar occurring in Cremona.
Yes. The rabbis explicitly blamed the playing of games for the severe afflictions hitting their community. They banned all betting games for an entire year.
Except for chess.
Except for chess.
Mm.
And Venice did the exact same thing in 1628. Frankfurt did it after a massive fire ravaged the city in 1711.
It is so consistent across different cities and centuries. I even read that individuals who are making personal religious vows to give up games as a form of spiritual discipline would carefully state, I vow to give up all games except chess.
It demonstrates that chess had completely transcended the category of a mere diversion. In times of profound distress, when disease is outside your door or your city is rebuilding from ash, people need a mental escape that does not feel spiritually corrupting. Chess provided order in a chaotic world.
It makes complete sense. If you are a parent trapped inside during a severe crisis, you might ban all frivolous activities to maintain discipline.
Right, no dice or cards.
But you leave the chessboard out because it feels productive. It requires thought.
Exactly.
And because chess was so deeply embedded in the cultural psyche, it inevitably found its way into the mythology of the Jewish people.
Which brings us back to the incredible story we teased at the beginning.
Yes, the 11th century legend of the Jewish Pope.
This is a story originating in the city of Mainz, Germany, situated right on the Rhine River.
Right. The legend centers around a renowned miracle-working sage named Rabbi Simon Haggadol, or Simon the Great.
And Rabbi Simon has a young son named Elchanan.
But tragedy strikes. One day, the boy is kidnapped by a Christian caretaker and handed over to a monastery.
The parents are absolutely devastated. Rabbi Simon fasts and prays continuously for his son's return.
Meanwhile, young Elchanan is raised entirely within the church. He possesses this brilliant mind, rising rapidly through the ecclesiastical ranks.
He becomes a cardinal and then ultimately the pope.
Which is just wild to imagine.
In the various historical chronicles that record this legend, he is referred to as Pope Andreas, or Anacleto II.
But the turning point of the narrative hinges on his memory, doesn't it?
It does, because Pope Andreas knows his true origins. He remembers his Jewish roots and deeply desires to return to his ancestral faith.
But he is the head of the Catholic Church. He cannot simply walk out of the Vatican unnoticed.
Exactly. He realizes that to bridge this impossible divide, he must force his father, Rabbi Simon, to travel all the way to Rome.
So the Pope devises a plan that is just brutally effective. He issues severe anti-Jewish decrees specifically targeting the Jews of Mainz.
He bans the observance of the Sabbath, forbids the practice of circumcision, and outlaws the religious holidays.
He creates an existential threat because he knows it will force the community leadership to send a delegation to Rome to plead for their survival.
And he knows exactly who they will send to lead that delegation.
His father.
Yes. When the desperate rabbis, led by Rabbi Simon, finally arrive at the papal palace, the Pope immediately pardons them from the customary requirement of kneeling.
Right. And then he dismisses all his guards and advisors from the room and makes a highly unusual request.
He challenges the eminent Rabbi Simon to a game of chess.
Just a quiet game of chess with the Pope.
Right. And during the match, the Pope easily defeats the rabbi. But the victory is entirely secondary.
It is the specific manner in which he plays that changes everything.
Exactly. As the wooden pieces move across the board, Rabbi Simon suddenly recognizes his opponent.
He realizes he is sitting across from his lost son, Elchanan.
Because the Pope is using highly specific idiosyncratic chess strategies that the rabbi had taught his son in early childhood.
It gives me chills just thinking about it. Chess acts as this medieval DNA test.
It really does. It is a secret language that survives decades of separation. And the resolution of the legend is deeply moving.
What happens next?
The Pope reveals his identity to his father. He immediately abolishes all the cruel decrees against the Ashkenazi Jews of Mainz, and he writes a theological text ostensibly for future popes to use. He vanishes from Rome. He returns to Germany, to his family, and to Judaism.
Wow. Hearing that narrative, I cannot help but think about the historical reality of the Crusades. I mean, this is not just a heartwarming story about a family reunion.
No, not love.
This is a community dealing with the very real terror of forced conversions and violence, and they are writing a fantasy where they win in the end.
That is precisely how historians interpret it. During the Crusades, the Jewish communities of the Rhineland suffered horrific trauma.
Right.
The idea of losing a child to forced conversion was a terrifying, ever-present threat. This legend serves as a powerful form of psychological resistance.
It is a collective fantasy where the highest Christian authority in the world is secretly one of their own.
Exactly. And crucially, the mechanism that undoes the tragedy is a shared intellectual tradition.
The chessboard.
Yes, and that secret language of chess moves between the Pope and the rabbi was not just a metaphor for cultural survival. The physical pieces on the board actually became a literal linguistic map of how these communities interacted with the broader world.
Which is an incredible transition from the mythology to the tangible history of the game.
It is.
But before we map out that language, I think it is vital to note who is actually playing, because history often focuses entirely on the male scholars, the rabbis, and the patriarchs.
Right, the men writing the texts.
Exactly. But the historical record shows that the chessboard crossed gender lines as well.
Absolutely. Pietro Carreras, in his comprehensive 1617 book Gioco degli Scacchi, specifically documents this.
He mentions a woman playing.
Yes, he notes the presence of an excellent, highly skilled, young Jewish female chess player living in the ghetto of Venice.
That is amazing. She was renowned enough for a Christian author to document her expertise in a published manual in 1617.
Exactly. Details like that force us to reevaluate our assumptions about the strict social confines of medieval society.
They really do.
Yeah.
And just as the game crossed gender lines, it crossed geographical borders, pulling different languages right onto the 64 squares.
If you trace the etymology of the word chess, you are essentially tracing medieval trade routes.
Right.
The original Arabic term for the game was shamat. As merchants brought it into Europe, you can track its adaptation in real time.
So how did the word change?
Well, in Catalan texts from the Iberian Peninsula, it became Isquaquis, or Isquas.
Okay.
As it moved into Italy, it evolved into Squacky and eventually Scacchi. And as it traveled east into Poland, it became Czech, or Sak.
And what is truly fascinating is how Jewish communities absorbed all of this while fiercely maintaining their own unique linguistic heritage.
Yes, they took the Arabic and European concepts and translated them directly into Hebrew.
Right. The central piece, the king, naturally became the melech. The queen was the malka.
But the bishop is where the translation reveals a distinct cultural divergence.
Oh, how so?
In Hebrew, the bishop became Phil, or Pil. This requires a bit of context to understand.
Okay, lay it on me.
The original piece in the Persian and Arabic versions of the game was an elephant.
An elephant?
Yes. When the game entered Christian Europe, the physical shape of the piece, with its two tusks, reminded Europeans of a bishop's mitre, the tall hat bishops wear, so they renamed it the bishop.
Ah, that makes sense.
But because Jewish communities were deeply engaged in studying Arabic texts and trading closely with Muslim neighbors, Their linguistic evolution completely bypassed that Christian European filter.
So they just kept the original Persian piece alive right on the board. The elephant stayed an elephant.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates the mechanics of cultural exchange. They are living in Europe, but retaining a direct line to the east.
We see it with the other pieces, too. The knight became the sus, farash, or parash, all variations basically meaning horse or horseman. The rook was the rook, maintaining the Arabic sound, but it was also translated as Merkava for chariot, or Migdal for tower.
And the pawns were called rigiol for foot soldier, or quite beautifully, gibor, meaning hero.
Wow, Gibor. Hero. It really encapsulates the medieval Jewish experience on a single board. They were a distinct minority, frequently isolated by strict laws or by physical walls.
Yet they were deeply, intricately entangled with the culture surrounding them.
So, as we step back and look at the full picture of our deep dives today, we started with a simple Indian board game that traveled along medieval trade routes.
We saw it trigger the anxieties of rabbinic authorities like Maimonides.
Right, who feared its power to distract men from their spiritual duties to the point of literally invalidating their legal standing in court.
We saw how everyday people simply refused to give it up.
Carving out pragmatic legal loopholes that protected the game even when plagues forced the banning of all other joys.
We explored how the trauma of the Crusades birthed the beautiful legend of a chess-playing pope.
And finally, we saw how the physical pieces themselves became this incredible linguistic melting pot of Arabic, Italian, Polish, and Hebrew.
For listeners who want to explore this intersection of history, law, and daily life further, the academic literature is really rich.
What should they check out?
Starting with the sources cited in our primary research, Israel Abraham's Jewish Life of the Middle Ages is an indispensable foundation.
Excellent.
For a comprehensive view of how the game's rules and pieces evolved globally, Harold James Ruthven Murray's A History of Chess and Emanuel Lasker's History of Chess are essential reading.
Perfect.
And to really understand the political and social implications of the game during this era, Jenny Adams' Power Play is a fantastic resource.
It completely changes how you view the board, doesn't it? I mean, think about the games sitting in your living room right now. We view them as simple entertainment.
Which leaves us with a provocative final thought. If a simple board game could survive centuries of strict religious scrutiny, bridge rival cultures, and serve as the mythological key to reuniting a father and a pope, what seemingly trivial game that we play today will historians study 1,000 years from now to understand our truest values?
Thank you very much for having been with us. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe for free to the channel, and from now on, we invite you to follow the next episode.